My dear brothers and sisters, fruitlessness invites disaster. Fruitlessness invites disaster. An inhabited house invites dilapidation. When a house is not inhabited for a long time, slowly it wears out and gets dilapidated. A depraved city invites ravenous and rapacious invaders. An unmilching cow invites the butcher's knife. If a cow doesn't give milk, it is worthless and it invites the butcher's knife. An unguarded soldier invites the enemy's bullet. An unprepared student invites failure. An unorganized businessman invites losses. A loose and lapsed Christian invites damnation. Fruitlessness always invites disaster. My dear brothers and sisters, you must have heard about the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is in Israel, a part of the Dead Sea is in Israel, and another part in Jordan. It's a lake about 50 kilometers in length and about 15 kilometers in width. And it is the lowest point of the earth. It is about 1,000 feet below the sea level. It is called the Dead Sea because there is no sustenance of life in the sea. It doesn't support any life. And therefore it is called Dead Sea. But once upon a time, this place that is occupied by the Dead Sea was a very fertile ground, very fertile ground. When you go to the book of Genesis, chapter 13, we have there an incident when patriarch Abraham called his nephew Lot, and he said to him, in the book of Genesis, chapter 13 following, he said, "Look, your herdsmen and my herdsmen are fighting over the grazing land." Then he said to him, "You take the left side, and I will take the right side. You choose whatever you want. And if you take the right side, I will take the left side. So let us not fight together because we are kindred. We are relations, brothers." And therefore, Lot looked towards the plains of Jordan, and then it was lush green. It was like the garden of God. So he took that portion. And Abraham took the other portion. Those cities that the plains and the cities that Lot took were the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah. And later on they became a very depraved city, and it was destroyed by fire and by brimstone. Totally it was burnt away. And slowly that city that was burnt away, a part of that, those two cities became the Dead Sea. And what we find, the place where Dead Sea is the place of Sodom and Gomorrah. Once upon a time, very prosperous plains. It was called as the garden of God. But because of his depravity, it was totally destroyed and annihilated. My dear brothers and sisters, fruitlessness always invites disaster. And this Dead Sea, as I said, does not support any life because the salinity in the Dead Sea is about 34%. 34% of the water in the Dead Sea is salt. In the ocean, it is only 4%. When you go to taste the ocean water, it is 4% salt. But in Dead Sea, it is 34% salt. Therefore, the salt content, the salinity is so high that nothing survives. The only way it gets water is the major source is from the Jordan. And when the water flows into Jordan, it carries some fish. But when it comes to the Dead Sea, all the fishes die. There's no plant life, there's no marine life over there. There's nothing in the Dead Sea, nothing is alive in the Dead Sea. Everything gets killed, it does not sustain life. Another characteristic of the Dead Sea is this, that it receives and receives and receives, but does not flow out. It just receives and receives water, but does not flow out. And that's the reason the content of salt is so high, the toxicity is so high in Dead Sea that it does not sustain or support any kind of life, either plant or even human life or even the marine life. It doesn't support. Fruitlessness always leads to disaster in life. My dear brothers and sisters, in today's gospel reading, we heard about the parable of the wicked servants. They were given and granted a beautiful vineyard by the master. Everything was fine about the vineyard. When the time of fruitfulness came, they did not return back or reciprocate the fruits that they were reaping to the master who was the rightful owner. And then we know the story. The master sent some of his servants, they were killed, they were thrown out, they were insulted, and finally sent his own son. And even the son was killed, thrown out and killed. And the master comes and takes away the vineyard and gives to somebody else. They were fruitless, and therefore disaster descended upon them. Disaster descended upon them. This particular parable that Jesus told is an indictment of the Jewish race. It's an indictment of the Jewish race. The Jews were mere slaves in Egypt. They had no right for their wages. We know that. They had no right even for their life. The children, male children, were taken and they were killed. But God in His mercy took them and made them into a nation. It is God that who called them and made them into a chosen race. God with a mighty hand protected the people of Israel, the Jewish race. When the soldiers of the Egyptians followed them, God opened up a way in the Red Sea and parted the Red Sea and made the people to go, walking dry-shod in the Red Sea. And then He did defeat the mighty Egyptian army that followed them, that pursued them. And God with a very providential hand provided them for 40 years in the wilderness, every day with manna and that quail. He gave them for 40 years, provided them. And then He also protected them from all the wild animals and the poisonous reptiles. These were the benefits that God had given to the people of Israel, though they were nothing but a bunch of slaves before they were liberated. God, with a very caring and concerned heart, gave them a land. They were vagabonds, they were immigrants and slaves, but God provided a beautiful land for them, the land of Canaan, flowing with milk and honey. And God, with a very pastoral heart, provided them with leadership. He gave them the patriarchs, the prophets, the kings, He gave them. When they asked for a king, they were judges. When they asked for the king, God gave them a king. But He led the people astray. Then God sent the prophets to guide them. And they killed some of the prophets, exiled some of the other prophets, and they mistreated and maltreated all the prophets that God had sent. And finally, when God sent His own Son, they took Him and killed Him between two thieves. Therefore, the time of judgment came. God took away the land from them, and they were shattered and scattered all around the world. But before this calamity came, God had warned them. Jesus came and warned them. The Gospel of Luke chapter 13 verses 34. He said, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones the others, how I wish I could gather you like a hen gathers brood under his wings, but you would not. Jesus very pathetically appealed to them. But after some time, he also gave a very threatening message to them, and he said, when they were admiring the beautiful temple of Jerusalem, the temple of Jerusalem, that was called as the third temple at the time of Christ, it was the most embellished, the most beautiful building upon the earth. The Jews themselves used to say it was built by Herod, King Herod. He spent a lot of money in rebuilding and refurbishing the temple of Jerusalem because he was not a Jew, he was a half Jew. And therefore, to entice and appeal to the Jews, he spent a lot of money in embellishing this temple of Jerusalem. And even the Jews, who were the enemies of Herod, they used to say, he who has not seen the temple of Jerusalem does not know what beauty is. He who has not seen the temple of Jerusalem does not know what beauty is, they used to say. So beautiful the temple of Jerusalem was. And when the disciples were admiring at the temple of Jerusalem, of Matthew chapter 14 verses 1 to 2, Jesus makes that forbidding and devastating announcement, prophecy, and he says, one stone upon another of this temple shall not remain, he said. And it did happen. Just almost 40 years later, the temple of Jerusalem was torn into pieces. It was totally destroyed. So much so that there was a man, a Roman, who plowed through the city of Jerusalem. He plowed through the city of Jerusalem. Nothing of Jerusalem, and even the temple remained. They set fire to the temple in the month of August in the year 70 AD. And when they set fire to the temple of Jerusalem, it was gold coated on the top, and the gold started melting. Many people went to collect the gold, and they perished in the fire over there. And finally, the temple of Jerusalem was totally destroyed. Until today, they don't have a temple at all. There is no temple for the Jewish people today. The temple that was destroyed in the 70 AD is still in the state of destruction. And Jesus had prophesied that fruitlessness always invites disaster. And so did the people of Israel. When they became fruitless, they invited disaster. Till today, even yesterday's news you must have heard, the Prime Minister of Israel saying, we are at war. 5,000 missiles from the Gaza Strip were fired on Israel. And therefore now Israel is in war. Even today it's going on. The battle is going on and on. Fruitlessness invites disaster. And so did it invite disaster for the people of Israel. My dear brothers and sisters, coming to our own life, God has blessed us with so many blessings and good things. How are we responding and reciprocating the blessings of God in our lives? And we should always remember that fruitlessness, when we do not repay God for the blessings that He has given, we are inviting disasters in our lives. We have to give back to God what He has given to us by way of blessing. And what is God asking us? We are called to return by way of charity, by way of Christian virtues. That is the return that God expects from us. We are called to make this world and our surrounding better than what we are finding it today. That is the fruitfulness that God is expecting from us. Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, as we participate in this Eucharist, may we ask the Lord to help us to be fruitful in life. I'd just like to end with a beautiful quote by Stephen Grillet. Stephen Grillet was a 19th century missionary. Very beautifully he said, I shall pass this world but once. I shall pass this world but once. Any good that I can do or any kindness that I can show to any other human being, let me do it now. Let me not defer it. Let me not neglect it, for I shall not pass this way once again. Let us be fruitful in our lives. Amen.